Thanks to all the speakers. We're going to roll right into our panel Q&A. We've got a microphone up here. We can ask questions. If you do need to change over to a different room, that's fine. But remember, the questions are in the spirit of pressure testing the ideas in order to make them better. Even if you think the idea sucks, let's have a little bit of kind of a innovative and improvisational spirit and say yes and. So how can you make this idea a little bit better than it was before these folks came into the room and improve it iteratively? This is where we put on our friendly pen testing, red teaming hats, like Bob said, and maybe use the Nerf bats rather than the fungo bats if you're a baseball fan. So yes, first question.
This one's for Steve. So my boss always asks me, what are the assets we're protecting when I want to bring new technology or new process in? So I'm curious, has anybody analyzed what this major cybersecurity attack on the country would do, what the impact would be, life loss, financial impact? Have you seen that anywhere, or have you looked into it?
The closest thing I could say that would address that is from different presidential directives, including PPD 41, which is out and easily read. Damage to property, loss of life. Now, will that one loss of life trip the wire that I'm talking about, or is it a catastrophic shutdown of all the electrical grid in one area, and now you have lots and lots of loss of life? I don't know what that delineator is. I could imagine in a political sense that one loss of life could, in certain circumstances, be, well, yeah, okay, that's not that bad. Well, all right, that's another discussion. So nothing in particular has been done in that sense that I can point to otherwise.
Some of the things, so the government every year or two, they run some exercises. One of them is called Cyberstorm. There's like 3 or 4 that seem to be competing for weird cyber names. And a lot of those, from what I understand, have not focused on the loss of life issues. They've been, the power grid goes down. Some of the stuff you guys are doing in the energy sector, looking at, I forget what you guys call yours, which is not a government-led, it's industry-led, right?
It's the North American Electric Reliability Corporation.
So NERC runs events.
Yeah, so NERC operates the GridX event,
yes,
which every 2 years, and coming near to you, November of this year, is number 4.
Yeah, so there have been some of those simulations that have been done. In talking with some of the Congress people, congressional staffers, agencies, kind of like what Steve said, a single loss of life might not be the thing that trips that breaker, especially when at a national level you have loss of life every single day, right? There's some number of people who just die from things every day. That's true. It's less funny than true. But like if you look on the highways, about 80 people every day die from car accidents. Some percentage of those are preventable. So that's why the Department of Transportation is pushing so hard for autonomous vehicles, because the stats say that about 60 of those 80 every day could probably be saved. So that's the type of thinking that they look at, the scale at which they have to think in order to have a societal level of cohesion and kind of stability. I think I saw a question over here somewhere.
There it goes. Okay. So my question is for Steve also. I enjoyed your talk, but from a military perspective, when we talk about a nation-state level attack that would affect a large part of our nation's defense capability or power grid or what have you, I think part of our capability from a military standpoint to either deter that or counterattack comes from the A word, right? Attribution. And that's something a lot of people kind of like to assume away. And it seems like we've got a real problem with that. Every time that we try to attribute any kind of major attack to a nation state, we largely get laughed at, right? It's like, well, if you want to attribute an attack to China, just hire Mandiant, no problem. They'll find China, right? So I think that's a problem. And how do you see us solving that in the future from a military cyber standpoint? Because I think, honestly, I don't like to as the gentleman talking about the electricity exercises was talking about, we don't like to air our dirty laundry, but if we have some, that's it. From a national military standpoint, we're not good at it. We're not good at attributing those large attacks to a nation state. And so what is their cause to not attack us? Because at this point, we can't really generally find a smoking gun. We haven't yet, really, unless I've missed something.
So I agree with you on that, absolutely, and I don't have an answer. That is another wicked problem that is being argued all the time. The only thing that I would say is where I'm focusing is I don't want to have to go back after it. So attribution is when you want to go back. I would rather us move into we're good, we're doing things. Look, we've got nuclear weapons sitting there, right? We know that. That keeps other people from using those. We've got military capabilities. In the military example, we've got those capabilities forward deployed. Here's what we do. We've shown willingness. In theory, that tamps down anybody else's desire to do things. So then I don't have to have the attribution part because it is so difficult. So I'm probably wishing that one away more than I should because I don't want to focus on it. That's a very difficult problem. No doubt, I agree with you there. I would rather get away from just the reactive mindset. That's my concern. We'd rather sit around and argue that problem as opposed to, well, what if we just show we're able to get our act together? And it's not just military, it's not just government. Our collective national act is so squared away that they just go, yeah, I'm not going to do that. It's not worth it. That's where I think we have to put more emphasis.
Yeah, as Steve said, there's not enough booze in the bar to really have the end of the deterrence conversation, which is where attribution is really effective. And only in some models of deterrence do you need attribution. It's the retribution piece. It's the increased cost after the fact for attackers. And I think a lot of that conversation comes from the thought of, we can't do any better to defend our nation against a nuclear attack other than deter the other guy from doing it. Because it seems like there's a lot of that conversation that comes in from the nuclear and military side that think about deterrence. But like Steve said, I'd rather build our walls higher to begin with. I'd rather keep people out rather than worry about how to punch them in the face after they do something. And I think that there's a certain segment of the InfoSec population who says, well, we're going to give up on this idea of prevent. We're just going to detect quickly and respond quickly. But how do you respond when you have maybe 1,000 people die? Right? How do you bring people back to life? That's hard. Right? So the response and recovery piece of that is fundamentally different when you deal with some of these bigger societal-wide cyber issues. And instead, if we invested more of our political will and institutional will in the defense piece and the preventative piece, then we could do two things. One is raise the bar higher than the low-hanging fruit adversaries can jump. So if we clear that battle space, we don't have to worry about, was this some dopey kid on a laptop in Southeast Asia? We don't have to worry about, was this ISIS? Then we can only worry about the higher caliber actors, which makes it easier to do attribution. And with a higher cyber tide line or cyber hygiene line, you also get more indicators that can point you in the right direction. So right now, like if somebody gets hit, there's probably not a lot of log files, depending on who gets hit. But if there's log files everywhere, it's like having tripwires everywhere. Then it's easy to tell. It's easier to build a story to tell who was doing what. So it makes attribution easier, and it prevents attacks from succeeding to begin with. So that's the way that I tend to look at it. And you had a question.
Hi.
Oh, there you are.
I got a question for David. So I'm part of a National Guard unit. We've worked with local public utility districts to help look at their security just completely voluntarily. We have the right people in the right place. One of the questions, they've been really willing to hear our security advice because they don't have a lot of resident experience in incident response or really digging in and finding security problems. So if we've got 121 utilities part of this coalition, do you feel like the security expertise is resident within that group to be able to actually respond, or are we going to end up with an issue where we have 120 electricians and a plumbing problem?
So that's a great question. So within the current membership of Cyber Mutual Assistance, we've got majors, like big major utilities with multiple millions of customers, and we've got utilities that maybe are serving 20,000 customers in the middle of far away. So there's a combination. There's a recognition, though, that frankly, the incentive for the majors to play is it's in everybody's interest to help the little operator out. Because if you're an attacker, are you gonna go after the major and really beat on them hard? I guess you could. How better? Wouldn't it be easier to go after the smaller operator? So the objective is to have sharing of expertise and building a community across all the utilities that are a part of this. So we've met, we had an in-person meeting in February, we're gonna have another one in August, but to really build a community and to, within Cyber Mutual Assistance, one of the things that we strongly recommend is that the utilities take a look at their footprint and they look at their neighbors to the north, south, east, and west. And if their neighboring utility is not a part of Cyber Mutual Assistance, for them to poke them and say, hey, there's a thing you should be a part of. And if their neighboring utility is a part of Cyber Mutual Assistance, you poke them, you say, hey, we need to talk about what is really going on within our systems. And we need to share. And we can talk about indicators of compromise, and we need to have a cup of coffee while the sky is blue, and we can patiently talk with one another before the storm starts.
This is another question for David. Specifically with mutual assistance, one of the things you have with the hardware, the power lines, et cetera, is they are all standardized and easily replaceable. Now, with the cyber mutual assistance, is there also a regulatory look towards standardization and interoperability from a software systems perspective or industrial control systems perspective with these utilities?
So we recognize there's super important differences between setting poles and hanging conductor, because a journeyman electrician is a journeyman electrician, and they're pretty fungible. You can move them all over the United States; it's no problem. With cyber and with utilities and industrial control systems, they are extremely customized to the specific application. We get that. There is, I think that as a general matter, there's not high interest in the notion of, we should all just do standardized implementation, because I talk about common mode failure. I mean, to a degree, common mode failure is already kind of a pretty high risk when we look at the number of major systems integrators, industrial control system vendors that essentially all utilities use. There's not tons of them. The specifics of their implementation will vary widely in terms of configuration files and et cetera, but the hardware itself is pretty common throughout the industry. So one of the issues that came up was when the program was first being built, people said, how do you wish to do this? Should we have a database? We'll have a database of skills. Oh, that would be awesome. And then other people said, that's a terrible idea. A database of skills and personnel and all, it doesn't make sense. It changes 100 times faster than you can actually ever write it or share it. Don't do that. So what the counterpoint is don't inventory, all potential stuff, but if there's a utility who has a problem and they call for help, we expect that utility to be able to say what it is that they need. Because if you call for help, you should be able to say what I need. I need 5 forensic examiners. I need 50 break-fix technicians to be able to say, yes, 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 I agree, and enter a 20-digit license code, based off a gold image. Or I need reverse engineering analysts, or what is it that I need? So the utility who's got the problem has to be able to define effectively what it is that they need, and then we believe that the community will be there to provide the answer responsive to the need. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
One thing that's interesting about that is I could see to one of the previous questions that if you have an organization that is very immature in a certain capability that might come into response, in my consulting past, I've worked with big enterprises who are, they have great, let's say, pen testing capabilities, but their incident response, they've got 2 people who kind of do incident response, and everything is outsourced, for example. Just because an organization isn't, or is big, or is, fulfilling some industry need, doesn't necessarily mean that they're mature on all fronts. And so, an inventory of maturity, capability maturity, could be an interesting, proactive way to align the right resources and groups to a particular response scenario.
I would think it would also help to for the organizations who are calling for help, as well as the others, to have some cross-pollination of ideas and skills and build up the maturity and make it more standardized, systematized across the industry.
My question is for both David and Bo, and I hope this doesn't deviate too much from the focus, but about a year and a half ago, I had an occasion to attend an FBI InfraGard meeting where I met a gentleman that was talking about electronic or electromagnetic pulse EMP threats. And to be quite honest, it was a little bit of a stretch for me. So we investigated some more. We went to the National Space Weather Work Group meeting that was held in Colorado a year ago. And one thing led to another. And what became evident is that that the electromagnetic pulse is a huge threat to the electrical grid, and also that in traditional engineering methods we have not addressed that possibility. And so I'm wondering, from Bo's perspective, as you work with medical device manufacturers, if that's being addressed or if that has come up in the discussions.
I haven't thought too much about EMP. I know a lot of people define that as a class of electronic warfare where they also class cyber as a different part of that. I don't tend to, just because they're wholly different threats. I mean, one is, you're talking about decimating a physical layer. The other one is pretty much everything else. Medical device makers, unless they're dealing with radioactivity to begin with, they're not really thinking about shielding other than what's required by the FCC and other governmental agencies that regulate shielding and electromagnetic interference. My personal feeling is, if you're dealing with an adversary who can muster the logistical and technical capability to pull off an EMP, you're probably talking about a nation state or something very near to a nation state anyways, at which point that's a higher bar than we'll be able to get to with a lot of the things that would be commercial grade stuff off the shelf. I don't know if you want to tackle that, or that's another one where we could have a whole long discussion over beers. The Russians have done certain things and other people have done certain things.
So I'll take that as an invitation to keep my comments short, because we probably want to talk about some other things as well. One of the things that the electric industry is doing is there's an organization called the the Electricity Power Research Institute. They have launched a 3-year program to look at different aspects of EMP, EIMI, HEMP, the whole deal, and issue reports throughout. One of the challenges with EMP is you don't have to start talking very long before you run into classified space. And one of the challenges is that utility operators, owners say, okay, if there's a particular design basis threat, give us the specs and we'll totally buy equipment that matches those specs. And then we talk to our partners in DoD, and DoD says, I would just love to tell you, but we go above this line and now I can't talk about it anymore because it's classified. So it's a really challenging topic, and I know that there are certain advocates who they love to get out their aluminum bats actually and beat on the heads of the electric sector and call us really bad names. I would say we're happy to do what we know what to do in terms of things like design basis and really the technical issues related to defending against those types of events. But frankly, we also have a dependency on our DoD to dissuade or prevent that type of activity because we're not good at stopping missiles.
So I see we've got a handful of hands in the air. We've got about 4 minutes left before we're going to break for lunch. We are going to continue down into the Pub 365 again today, so we can pick up some of these conversations there. But maybe we can do like a lightning round of questions, 1, 2, 3, and then we'll do a lightning round of answers up until our time.
Okay, so my question is for Bob. And is it Carolyn or Caroline?
Caroline. Thanks for asking.
So as far as electronic medical records go, you talked about ways to convince management to spend money on security teams. And you talked about compliance with industry standards, compliance with regulations, and then risk. As far as the industry standards and regulations go, what's the current state of them? Are they convincing to upper management? Is it helpful to have more, or is it counterproductive to have more? For EMR companies.
Okay, so question 1 is regulations. Do they help or hurt get budget from management?
So are we supposed to answer?
Let's get 3 questions, and then we'll go with the answers. That way we'll have more time.
Cool. We're running low on time, so just a comment rather than a question. Steve, I'm from the ISP. I'm here to help. The good news is that things are probably a little bit better than you think. There's definitely a lot of room for improvement, though, so find me afterwards. I have some very specific suggestions for you.
That's an easy question.
This question is also for Caroline. You mentioned before doing the, ego shaming of your CFO, saying, well, the people around us, our peers, are doing better than we are, and so forth, so you should put more money into that. One of the things that's on the horizon, but not quite here yet, is insurance. Yeah. And at some point, the CFO can very legitimately say, it's going to cost me how much to fix this myself, and there's no guarantee we've actually fixed it, versus I can pay that amount or potentially less, and even if it happens, we're covered. Yeah. And how do you see that trend toward insuring it go against the give me more money all the time?
Yeah. So is it cool? I can just respond to these really quickly in the interest of time. So with regards to the insurance thing, cyber insurance has actually been around for a long time. An organization I worked for 10 years ago had it. And I think it's a really important option to put on the table, especially with, the gentleman back here. One of the themes that he referenced is actually a skill set problem. So we have a major talent shortage in cybersecurity. And if you can't find people to do the job, even if you have the money to pay for them, then maybe insurance is a better option. It really depends on the organization. I don't know that in a lot of cases only insurance is going to be your best option. I think when it comes to cyber insurance, just like when it comes to life insurance, health insurance, you got to look at the fine print. So when does it apply and when does it not apply? And when it does not apply, what sort of mitigating controls do you have? So I think it's a valid option to put on the table. And then, the conversation really becomes about under what circumstances would we not be able to make a claim and how do we account for those? And with my response to kind of the question about industry standards, best practice frameworks, it's another like kind of lame response. Like it depends on who you're talking to, but that's the truth, right? So when I was at Zynga, we were starting the security team from scratch. They got a lot of money because they had a major incident, and they said, "Okay, build a team." And we built the team, and then we hired a CIO, and the CIO said to my boss, who was a CISO, "Hey, it seems like you have a lot of really smart people, and they're really busy. But how do I know that they're working on the right things?" And, we responded. And she said, "Well, it would be a lot easier for me if you guys would just do an ISO assessment. And then I would have an industry level accepted, lens through which to view your program." The other common scenario that I see is, so I work for a vendor and our clients have their preference for whatever lens they see the world through, and a lot of times there's a framework or a best practice, and so we'll kind of ask like, well, what do you need, and to what extent can the documentation that we've prepared accommodate that? But I'll let Bob speak to the medical specific component of that.
Yeah. So one interesting thing that I've found about both regulatory standards and the best practice like ISO and NIST or whatever other standards is that for us it has been convincing in the sense that it's been a hindrance for business development purposes or other things that the company is trying to do. So like HIPAA, if you're dealing in healthcare, is like the very, very low bar that you have to get across. But doing something like CMS's ARS or SOC 2 or all of those other high trust, all of those other regulatory or industry standards, when you're working with other enterprises or you're trying to sell into new markets, those things are enablers for the business. They're not. They are a pain in the ass, but if you frame them as enablers and things that are going to actually help the business owners open up new doors, I found that to be really, really effective. So like, for instance, going through SOC 2 Type 2 audit for us, for a couple of our products, allows us to just get into a lot more enterprises, for example. And then one other quick comment on the insurance. So we have cyber liability insurance, and one thing that is worth keeping in mind that if you don't have some semblance of a security program in place, they can refuse to give you coverage, or they can refuse to pay, like they reserve the right to pay out claims. So anyone who, like a CFO who is thinking that they're just going to throw $50,000 at insurance annually and get everything taken care of, like a couple $1 million policy, they're probably hearing some pretty bad advice, and so it's worth getting in front of that. So.
All right. Well, thank you to the panelists again.